Hey,
Hey, buddy.
Axel.
And, hey, buddy.
Hey, great to see you. Thanks for coming to Comic Book News. I appreciate it.
Happy to be here.
So we got a lot to talk about, man. You've done a lot in comics. You've made a lot of comics that I personally love, like some of my all-time favorite comics. So,
Well, thanks.
but first thing I want to know, though, give us a little secret origin of Axel Alonso. So, how'd you get into comics? What did you do before you got into comics? What led you into this game?
What didn't I do? Man, oh man. I was a fisherman. I was a journalist. I was an Alaskan fisherman. I was a journalist. And then I saw an ad in the Times that DC Comics was hiring editors. So I put in my resume. I got an interview with an editor named Lou Stathis, who liked me because he read an article I wrote in a paper that made fun of a guy that stole his girlfriend. So I was very lucky. So essentially, I got a job at Vertigo. And then I quickly realized I wasn't the right editor for doing fantasy and books with a strong quotient of unicorns and goblins. And I made my own. I charted my own path at Vertigo with books like 100 Bullets and Preacher and Human Target and Hellblazer. And the rest is history. Marvel called me in 2000 and I went there.
So up until that point, Vertigo had been, of course, famously started by, I guess, the Sandman line and come out of Swamp Thing. By the time you got there, from what I read, you started around Doom Patrol number 80, Animal Man number 73. So you were kind of midstream.
It's funny. Yeah, I remember the first comic book I worked on was an Animal Man book by Jimmy Delano and Steve Pugh. Yeah.
And not long after that, so you started working on Hellblazer, and along came books like Preacher and 100 Bullets, books that were different from the other Vertigo books, and they seem to have a harder edge, more of a crime-oriented, maybe some fantasy in there. To talk about what you tried to bring to Vertigo.
Well, I think the thing is that very early on at Vertigo, I realized that as an editor, you should bring something to the projects you work on. And I realized I had nothing to contribute to a book like The Books of Magic or Sandman, because my influences were not fantasy and science fiction. They were hard-boiled crime, horror, thrillers, suspense, and sword and sorcery. Let's just say books with a higher testosterone quotient. So those were the movies and books I read. And even as a kid, as a comic book reader, I love Luke Cage, which is blaxploitation. I like The Unknown Soldier, which is military suspense. I lean toward characters a little bit offbeat. So I never looked at comic books as being superheroes. I looked at them as being a medium to tell genre stories.
Right, and other genres outside of that narrow niche that comics had sort of painted themselves into. And then even Vertigo, while really publishing some awesome, I mean, nobody's going to say Sandman is not awesome.
It's a masterpiece. Yeah.
But it's sort of, the whole line seemed to be like Sandman flavored in a way, right? It was all that sort of fantasy material. You brought in a different kind of sensibility. I thought Preacher, 100 Bullets were amazing, like right turns for Vertigo that gave it a whole new thrust.
Thanks. Yeah, I mean, I think that the main thing was that I felt like it was important to me to work on books that I felt there was an audience for that was like me, that read the same books, saw the same movies, and wanted the same kind of content. That was my goal, and that was my history at Vertigo. I had a really good time there. I had a really good time. Really proud of my.
So how much
run there.
So how much did you have to do with bringing certain creators to Vertigo?
Well, with the Vertigo anthologies, which I did, Gangland, Weird War Tales, Strange Adventures, and Heartthrobs, I brought in a lot of people. Like Brian Azzarello got his start there. Greg Rucka did one of his first comic book stories for Weird War Tales. Robert Rhodey, a lot of people. I got Brian Bolland to do a lot of stuff. Jim Lee did his first DC work in a story in Flinch #1 called Rocket Man. Yeah, he had never done work with DC until he did that one 10-page story. So again, it was really about using that as a canvas to bring in everything from established talent like Richard Corbin to new people that I thought had talent like Brian Azzarello and Greg Rucka.
So wait a minute. So where were you using Corbin? You were using Corbin then at Vertigo?
Yeah, he did a bunch of stories in my anthologies for me, Weird War Tales. He also did a book called an adaptation of William Hope Hutchins' The House on the Borderland. He did an entire graphic novel that Alan Moore did the intro for.
Oh, okay.
A lot of work for me. Yeah. So when I went to Marvel, I said, "Yo, Richard, come over here," because I'm the biggest Corbin fan there's alive. Maybe
All
next
right,
year.
I'll fight you for that one, buddy. But
Yeah.
we'll find out, because I was going to say, I guess you are, because obviously you edited him, and I didn't even know that he had that work in those books. So okay, but so obviously somebody at Marvel said, "Hey, man, this Alonso guy is he's got an eye for talent, and he's editing some really cool books in a thrust, in a way that's catering to a different audience than currently most Marvel comics were." So how did you make the move to Marvel? Who approached you? How did that happen?
Well, somebody did, and that was my boss at Marvel, who is now my partner at AWA, Bill Jemis. Bill Jemis and Joe Quesada were Bill was contemplating a shift editor-in-chief, want to bring in talent and new editors to the table. So he and Joe wanted me to come to Marvel. And when I was offered the job, I said, no fucking way. I had no desire to go to Marvel. I said, I haven't read Spider-Man or X-Men since I was like 11. I'm not good at it. But Bill was persistent. He said, here, read these books. And I read them, and I got an angle on what I would do if I were to edit the stuff. And then I decided to make the jump.
Which books did he give you to look at, if you remember?
Well, he started me with Spider-Man and Hulk right out the gate. So what I did was I went back and looked at Spider-Man, and what I liked about Spider-Man as a kid, it was easier for me to access the Hulk with his anger management issues, And I looked at stuff like Conan and the Hulk, Conan, the Black Panther, and I remembered why I liked these characters as a kid. But what happened was I started to realize, you know what? If I take a job here, I can approach this as not that they're superheroes, but that each of them is a genre study. Hulk can be horror. Thor can be sword and sorcery.
Yes. Cage
can be blaxploitation crime. Spider-Man is superhero, because that's what he is. But you can also explore science fiction there and fantasy there, So it was about realizing you could do a Nick Fury book that's pure espionage. Doctor Strange is magic. They're not just superheroes in tights. Each one is a different story, so I could approach it like that. So when I started to realize I could do that, the job at Marvel didn't sound so absurd.